We would like to get started, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you to our second session of Journey to Health. And today we're going to do things slightly differently. Bonnie is going to be preparing the recipes, and we will do that part first, and then I will be talking about things from slides. So we're going to ask Bonnie to go ahead and begin.
Okay, well, we're glad you're here. Even though it's sunny, it's still pretty cold, but it's nice to have you here with us. And again, you can download the recipes if you want to. Go to our website at www.damascusgrace.org. At the top, there is a Ministries tab. Click on that, and you'll see that there is Journey to Health. Click on that, and you'll see the two new recipes on that. So we'll start today with the dessert first. When I was a kid, when my sister and I were in grade school, she would come home with tales from her classroom, and she had a classmate who ate her dessert first. Well, this was quite a topic for our dinner table because that was a no-no at our house. Well, we won't be eating it first, we'll just be making it first. So the first recipe we're doing is carrot macaroons. And this recipe calls for a cup of carrots, so I'll put that in. Calls for a fourth of a cup of water, a half a cup of honey. This is pretty full. You know how gooey honey is. Two tablespoons of oil. We usually use olive oil almost all the time. A teaspoon of vanilla. 2 cups of shredded coconut. A fourth of a cup of whole wheat pastry flour. Now, I found that whole wheat pastry flour is not easy to find. They used to have it at our local Giant, but they don't carry it anymore. I would assume you could use any kind of flour. Since this is healthy, we try to do something healthy, but if you don't want to buy a great quantity of flour, then even if you have regular flour at home, the regular white stuff, it's only a fourth of a cup. So it's best if you use something healthy, but if you don't have it, so it's a fourth of a cup of whole wheat pastry flour and a half a teaspoon of salt. So now I mix this all together. And it really mixes up quite well. No eggs, as you notice. And it's the unsweetened coconut. It's not the sweetened coconut. Okay. Now the recipe calls for me to let it sit. I think this is so the flour will bind with it and help to keep it together. So I will put on my timer on my phone, and then I'll start with the next recipe. So let me put on my timer here. You don't really need to go for too long, so I'll just do it 3 minutes. Okay, here we go. Now our next recipe is spinach, ginger, butternut tofu curry. This is pretty easy to make. So it calls for, first, it calls for a tablespoon of oil. So I'll get my supplies over here. Got my burner on here. A tablespoon of oil, large diced onion, which is what this is. Put this in here. Two cloves of crushed garlic, and this can vary because the cloves I use were quite large. So if you really like garlic, you might want to have more cloves. Or if you like less, you might want to put in less. Okay, so we're waiting for this to. Do you want me to move this over? Okay, it just takes a few minutes to heat up here. So as this is heating up, let's see, I'll turn it up a little more. Oh good, it's showing it. Okay, now I'll put in, it's still heating up, but I'll put in my ginger. What I used is ginger paste. I find ginger paste is easier to work with, 2 tablespoons of ginger paste. I think you could use regular ginger, but this is called Journey to Health, and I'm still on this journey, so I don't exactly know how to use the raw ginger. Maybe some of you do, but it gives, in any case, what you use. There's my timer. So now I'll ask John to take over from here, and I'll start to assemble the macaroons. So we have 2 going at the same time here.
Okay, so I'm going to be the kitchen help. And actually, I took a course recently from an institution called Spaulding Rehab Hospital, and it's affiliated with Harvard Medical School, and they have there an Institute of Lifestyle Medicine, and they also have a course called Chef Coaching. And so I took the course. The idea was to learn something about being a chef. I must confess I'm not a chef, and I still think I have quite a ways to go, but I did learn a few things. And one of those things was I learned how to use a chef's knife. Well, I'm not an expert at it, but I did buy one. And Bonnie actually thinks that's the best thing that came out of the whole course, is the chef's knife. I will try to show you that here in a few minutes. Got to get these onions to look clear. We have to saute them till they look a little bit clear. And that's not happening as fast as I would like it to. But it is coming along.
I don't know whether he can show this as well. Can I? If I show, you can see what it looks like. Can you see this? No. So I have to get over this way.
Here.
Okay. If you can see this, yeah, okay. You can
There
see
you
what the
go.
mixture looks like now. So I'm getting ready to, I've started making this using a scoop. I've started to put this on my cookie sheet.
So I'm thinking this is looking somewhat clear. And now I'm going to do the next step, and that is to add the spices. And the spices are already in a nice little container for me, so it's rather easy to do. And so there they go.
And the spices are what?
And turmeric is one of those spices. And did you say cardamom?
Coriander.
Oh, coriander, cumin, turmeric, and coriander are the 3 spices that just got added.
A tablespoon of each.
Tablespoon of each, okay. And so then we mix that up a bit, and then we have to add tomatoes. And the tomatoes are all ready to be added here, so in go tomatoes. And then second can of tomatoes. Lots of tomatoes. And then we are going to mix that all together. And that has to sit here and simmer for a little bit.
This is a little different for us trying to do 2. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time, and I guess we have difficulties at times here.
Okay, well, that's simmering a little bit. I'm going to show you the wonderful chef's knife that I obtained on Amazon. It's truly a knife. Looks a little like a Bowie knife, I guess. And the real advantage of it is that it's very sharp. You have to be very careful in using it, and you are taught that the way you use it, and there are little films on YouTube that will teach you how to use a chef's knife, but you put your knuckles up against it and you let your fingertips hold whatever it is you're cutting so that you keep your fingers away from the knife blade. You don't want to end up with less fingers than when you started out. So that's the chef's knife, and every time you use it, you have to do something to keep it sharp, because the edge is somewhat bendable. It's not real bendable. It's very hard and steel, but it does bend a little bit because it's so thin. In order to be very sharp, you have to hone it with a honing rod. And have a honing rod here, which I'll just demonstrate, and a cutting board. And you hold the honing rod on the cutting board and the knife in your hand, and you hold the knife at a slight angle, and you draw it across the honing rod as you move it downward, and you do that on each side in order to sharpen. And what it does is it straightens out that very fine edge that's so sharp in cutting. So that's how you keep your knife sharp, and that's very important. Well, what Bonnie has found out is that using this knife, you can cut through a butternut squash very easily. It's not quite like cutting butter, but it's much closer than trying to use some of the dull knives that we've had for years, and which I have been the one called upon to do the cutting because it's quite a chore with a dull knife. So that is the chef's knife. And I guess you don't need me
Yes,
at this
thank you.
point.
Yes.
Okay.
While John was talking, I added 2 tablespoons of honey, and I added the salt. And the next I will add is 16 ounces of firm tofu. Now this tofu is, I froze it because if you freeze it at least overnight, it gives your tofu a different texture. You can also bake it, but that takes a little longer. It takes probably a good 40 minutes. I've done that as well. You can put it on a tray, spread it out, cut it in cubes, and spray a little bit of oil on top and sprinkle with a little bit of salt. But if you just freeze it, it gives it a different meatier texture. It adds interest. So I've added the tofu, and also what we have, as you said, I use that wonderful knife to do the butternut squash. So I have already baked the butternut squash. So there we have pretty much our curry. Now what we add to this is coconut milk, which seems to be present in a lot of Thai dishes. Seems like all the cream rises to the top, especially when it's so chilly. With the ginger and the cumin, the turmeric, and the coriander, it gives really a wonderful smell to your kitchen. Okay, let me just stir it up a little. So you can see then it mutes the color of the tomatoes. It's more of a yellowy turmeric color. Now the last thing we add is 12 ounces of frozen spinach. Now you might not want to add frozen, you might want to add fresh, which is also good. But this is already chopped up for you, which makes it just a lot easier for you to do. Now you can, at the end, and I'm sure you could use some other greens too if you would prefer that. So this makes a goodly amount here. Oh, and the original recipe is if you download the recipe at the very bottom, it tells you where I got it from. It comes from Jeremy Dixon, who is owns several restaurants and is a chef in Australia or New Zealand. I think it's New Zealand. And it's at www.cook30.com. And actually, this is the first recipe that comes up there. I may have adapted it a little. The original recipe called for just 2 cups of butternut squash. We found the smallest butternut squash I could find, and we just used the neck, and it was already just under 4 cups. So it's really hard to find a butternut squash that's only 2 cups. But if you prefer and then use the rest for something else, that works too. So here you have this wonderful curry. Now it is not spicy hot. We are not people, I mean, look at us. We're aged here. So we are not spicy hot people. We're people who are mild. If you like it spicier, we'll not be in your kitchen, so you can do what you want. But this is, it turns out to look lovely, and you can also, it says you can also put parsley on top, but to dress it, but it looks really nice and green. So let me give us a final here. I have here, and probably you can't see this. Is that right? Do I need to move this, Andrew? So let me move it over here. I have brown rice. You could put it on. Is this okay? You could put it over quinoa. Then they have all different colors of quinoa now. Or as John loves, everything over toast. That's his way. So let's put some brown rice here. So here we have some brown rice. And let me just find myself a ladle. So it's nice when you know your way around your church's kitchen. And we'll put a little out here. Whoops. And there we have it. We have this is the spinach, ginger, butternut, and tofu curry. And when you have little elves to cut everything up for you beforehand, this thing goes really quickly. So it's really nice if you have help to do that. And also, you never know that our church had such a wonderful oven, but this is supposed to, the macaroons are supposed to cook for 25 minutes, and look at that, they even leapt onto a plate all by themselves. So this is what it looks like in the final product. And I will say, when you take these fresh out of the oven, it is really like macaroons are. It's a little bit crunchy, and it's really a nice soft texture inside, but crunchy. They're very, very good. Anyway, I wish I could give you one, but I can't yet. One day maybe. Anyway, concludes the cooking part of the program.
So we're going to talk about your body's rhythms and see what we can learn about that's useful. And I don't know if any of you have seen this plant before, but it's called a mimosa. Sometimes I guess a Chinese silk tree. And it has a very interesting feature. During the daytime, it's nice and bushy like you expect a plant to look, but at night it folds up its leaves like it's sleeping. And that's quite a remarkable thing to see. And for a long time, people didn't realize that even if you put that plant in the dark, it still goes through the same cycle of about 24 hours. It'll spend about half the time all leaves out looking like a plant in the sunshine, but then it'll spend another half of the day like at night all folded up. But even when there's no light, it does this same thing on about a 24-hour cycle. And that was not discovered till about 1729, and a French scientist by the name of Jean-Jacques de Marine discovered that, and it led to more discoveries in the future. And a guy named Franz Holberg began to study the rhythms of life, and he coined a term, circadian, which means in Latin about a day. And he did this in 1959. He did a very important experiment. He took mice who, mice, they are nocturnal creatures. They spend their night up prowling around, finding food, doing whatever they want. And then during the daytime, they sleep. And So he injected mice with something called endotoxin. It's a very poisonous substance, comes from a bacteria, and it can kill you. He gave them a small dose of that at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and he found that 83% of the mice died when he gave them that substance at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. If he gave the same dose of the same substance at 2 o'clock in the morning when the mice were up and were prowling around and doing their usual thing, like it's their daytime, only 13% of them died. So you have to scratch your head and say, why such a huge difference? And that is indeed a huge difference. So it has to do with the hormones and the various things that are going on in the physiology of the mouse. And we're not here to really talk too much about mice, but we're to talk about humans. And your body has about 25,000 different genes. Every cell of your body has those genes. There are thousands of chemical interactions that go on every day in your cells. You have roughly 37.2 trillion cells in your body and 100 billion nerve cells in your brain. And you have to ask yourself, what keeps all of this running smoothly? And the answer is a clock. Now that may sound a little surprising, but we do use clocks to keep things coordinated. And here is a little diagram showing that there are actually 7 different proteins that your cell can make, and those 7 different proteins work together to make a clock mechanism that functions on about a 24-hour cycle. And it's too complicated for me to explain. I don't even think I understand it myself completely, but I can give you a sort of little sketch of what we understand is going on. Let's think just of 2 proteins. Protein A, the body or the cell makes on a regular basis. Protein B is stimulated when protein A accumulates. So protein A is created by the body, and as it accumulates, it stimulates the production of protein B. Protein B has the property that it inhibits the production of protein A, so as protein B builds up, it turns off the making of protein A. Now the body naturally recycles proteins, so it'll break down proteins. So as protein A is turned off, it'll tend to break down, and protein B will break down. And when the level gets low enough, then protein A will begin to be created again, and that will stimulate B to be created again and build up the level, and then protein B will turn it off. So that whole thing could cycle. Now, I must admit, I don't believe that quite works chemically, but it sort of illustrates the kind of thing that's going on here. And so that's just to try to help us understand a little bit of what the physiology is. Now that's built into all of your cells, and so we have in our cells a clock mechanism. Your brain also has a master clock mechanism that uses the clock mechanism in the cells, and that master clock mechanism is located in 2 brain nuclei called the suprachiasmatic nuclei on either side of your brain, just above where the nerves from your eyeballs cross as they go back into your brain. And so those are the master clock mechanisms. And interestingly, different organs in your body all have clocks. Each organ, pineal gland, the heart, the kidneys, the adrenal cortex, your liver, your pancreas, your spleen, your adipose tissue even, the fat cells in your body all work on a clock mechanism. and the intestines also work on a clock mechanism. And you can understand a little about why that would be important. Because if, let's say, your intestines, all the cells worked independently of each other, nothing would happen usefully. So everybody has to be on the same wavelength and working together to get things to happen. And of course the nerves have a part in this, but chemicals also have a part, and they run on a clock mechanism to do that. So that's very key in understanding how our bodies work. And there's a text in Psalm 92, verses 4 and 5. It says, "For you, Lord, have made me glad through your work. I'll triumph in the works of your hands. O Lord, how great are your works! Your thoughts are very deep." And indeed, they are very deep. Now, looking at the clock mechanism in our human bodies, there's something important to understand, and that is the clock mechanism runs on a cycle which is about 24 hours, but it's not exactly 24 hours. It's generally a little longer than 24 hours. And what happens is the sunlight hits your eyes and hits certain cells in the retinas of your eyes that don't stimulate vision, but actually send signals to those master timekeeping nuclei in your brain to speed them up a little, so they actually run on a 24-hour cycle because of the daylight and the night cycle that the sun produces. And so that's how you actually turn out to run on a 24-hour cycle. Now, because your body runs on a 24-hour cycle, there are certain things that happen in your body that are very important that we can look at and see what that cycle looks like. And so I have here on the screen 3 curves that are very key in understanding the rhythms of your body. The first one we'll talk about is blue here in the picture, and that's the plasma melatonin level. And melatonin is a chemical that causes you to feel tired and sleepy. It helps you go to sleep at a reasonable time every night. So that's how your body helps you to sleep. And if you were put in a dark cave somewhere, that cycle of that melatonin would continue, and it would help you to sleep on a roughly 24-hour cycle. But the sun in the daytime and the night works to make that an actual 24-hour cycle. And then the second curve we want to talk about is the black curve, and that's called plasma cortisol. That's a very important hormone in your body, and as you see there, it gets quite low in the evening. It reaches its lowest point at about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening. Then it slowly begins to rise, and then near morning it shoots up rather rapidly and gets you ready to face a new day. It's actually a hormone that works along with epinephrine or adrenaline, and we call those fight and flight hormones. They get your body ready to face danger or whatever is happening that you have to face in your day. And so that's changing your physiology. And then at night it gets low, because when it's low it allows the body to do different things. It allows healing and those kind of nutritive things to take place in your body. Whereas during the daytime, you're not trying to build up the cells of your body, you're using your energy outward directed to face the world. And then the third curve there is the body temperature, your core temperature, and that correlates very closely with what's called alertness. And it's what scientists call circadian alertness. It goes on a 24-hour cycle, and you see that it's quite high there in the latter part of the day, the daytime, from like noon on, it's at a pretty high level. And then in the evening, about 9 or 10 o'clock, according to that curve, it tends to begin going down. So that part of your physiology says you need to become less alert. Now what happens is that's very important for sleep, because when you first go to sleep, you are very tired, so you don't have trouble falling asleep even though your core temperature is high initially. But then as you get rested, you would be more alert according to that curve, but according to that curve, you're not as alert, but you're more rested, I guess I should say it that way, and that keeps you asleep because that body temperature gets lower, and that makes you less alert, and you stay asleep till near morning, and then it gradually starts to increase again and raise your alertness. So when you first get up in the morning, you're rested, but you're not as alert in some ways. And I know that I get up somewhat blurry-eyed at times, but as the day goes on, you become more alert. But then eventually you get tired and you're ready to sleep again. So the actual movement of your body temperature works along with your tiredness to keep you asleep longer. And that's an important thing. So this next curve is actually a composite of a number of curves, different experimenters, just showing you when the body temperature peaks. And it's slightly earlier than what the previous curve showed. It peaks around 8 or 9 o'clock. And that tells you when it's best to go to sleep at night. And so circadian control is important. It is determined by the light and dark cycle. It is not determined by when you choose to eat or sleep, but it does determine the best times to sleep and to eat. So we're going to look a little more at that. And we're going to look now at sleep. And so sleep happens best when your body temperature is just beginning to decrease. And the reason I say that is because you will be able to stay asleep longer, because as the body temperature is decreasing, you're becoming less alert. Even though you're more rested, you will stay asleep. Also, the melatonin is turned on because it's dark, hopefully. That's what you want. And that will help you stay asleep as well. And the cortisol is low initially, and that's important because it allows healing. And we're going to see why that's important even more here in just a second. But it reaches its lowest point, as we said, about 9 p.m. and it begins to rise again about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now here's a picture of what sleep looks like normally. And this is an EEG record, somewhat schematized. And it shows that you go into your deep sleep initially when you go to sleep, because that's when you are really tired. And that's an important thing, that you get to refresh yourself with that deep sleep, going down to levels 3 and 4 right away when you go to sleep. And then later, as you see, the curve rises, and you will usually awake a few times during the night. And then you see the dark bars there. Those are fairly shallow sleep, but they're called Rem sleep. And that's when you do the dreaming that you can remember. And you can only remember the dreaming if you're awake for 5 minutes in one of those periods. Then you'll remember your dreams. So if you had a heavy meal the night before near bedtime, you won't sleep as well, and you will tend to be awake more, and you'll remember your dreams. So that's why you think, well, I had a bad night, I dreamt a lot. Well, you actually dream every night, you just don't remember it because you sleep better. And so now this deep sleep is really important. Let's take another look at it. Here's another graph, and it shows the sleep at the top of the graph. But on the bottom it shows the level of growth hormone. Now you've probably heard of baseball players taking growth hormone to help them restore their bodies after an injury or that sort of thing. Well, they're not supposed to do that. That's cheating. But it's important that growth hormone actually rises when you're in deep sleep. And it's important for that to happen when the cortisol level is low, so the body actually allows the healing to take place. So the whole thing is worked out very nicely that it will happen when you first go to sleep early in the night, and you will be able to restore those damaged tissues and get your rest in the way that you need to. And then later on, it's not so important to have growth hormone anymore, and you see the level goes down dramatically. And you don't want growth hormone to be too high too long, because it'll cause some strange things to happen. You're not going to grow taller anymore if you're an adult. The epiphyses of your bones have all closed, so you won't grow any taller. But as you get older, your nose will grow longer. And that is not something you really want to happen too much. So it's good that you just sleep at a reasonable time, and you get the effect of the growth hormone when you need it, and it's not there all the time. Now, what if you disregard your circadian rhythms? Well, some really interesting experiments have been done to show in animals what happens. You can't do these kind of experiments in humans. It wouldn't be allowed. It would be unethical. But people have studied the golden hamster, and they have caused a mutation in the clock gene, the period gene. It's actually the period gene. That's the name of one of the genes, and the protein that it creates is part of that clock mechanism. And when that is mutated, then the hamster doesn't follow that nice schedule where he's, awake and doing things at night and asleep during the daytime. He begins to be up at all hours doing whatever, day or night, eating whenever he wants and whatever. And what happens is, it is observed that his lifespan is shortened by 20%. So that's a very significant shortening of one's life. Of course, he's just a hamster and doesn't know any better. But they did another really interesting experiment, which they took those old hamsters that were about to die, and actually their circadian mechanism isn't working well. They grafted new embryonic tissue for those cells that keep the rhythm in that master pacemaker of the body. And when they did that in these old animals, they actually live 20% longer than normal hamsters live. So if we could get a graft when we get old like I am, it might actually prolong our lives. But nobody knows how to do that yet in a safe way. And I guess one would still have to figure out whether that was really a useful thing. But it seemed like it gave a new infusion of life to the hamster. And here's a picture of a hamster. I love these critters. They're so cute. Now, another experiment involved the clock protein in mice. They mutated that. They found that the mice got less sleep, they did more eating, they gained weight, and they got high blood sugar. They became very much like diabetic humans. So it really has a bad effect. And we know from studies that people who work shifts, and if you work a shift, I'm sorry to have to even say this, but there are health consequences to working night shifts. And one of those consequences is weight problems. Another is high blood levels of triglycerides, which are not healthy for you. Low high-density lipoprotein, which is important in removing cholesterol from your arteries. And heart disease And cancer, a number of different cancers have been observed to be more frequent in people who have to work night shifts. And irritable bowel syndrome and ulcers and reflux esophagitis are all more common in people that have to work night shifts. So there are real health consequences for humans, even though we can't do experiments to see what would happen if we took away their pacemaker or that sort of thing. And I used to work night shifts as a physician, and I know how unpleasant it is to have to work a night shift. And the real problem is that you work night shifts for the week, but on the weekend you don't want to be working a night shift when you're home and not having to work. You don't want to be up at night and everybody else is asleep. So you want to shift everything and try to be up in the daytime when people are up so you can live a life a little bit and then get your sleep at night, and that sort of throws everything off. And so you're terribly jet lagged and nothing is quite normal. And so I can testify it's not really a great way to live. Now, people have also studied the effect of sleep and how we get it on the risk of becoming diabetic, type 2 diabetic. And they find that if you sleep too little, then you have 28% higher risk for becoming diabetic. If you sleep too long, that's not great either. In fact, you're more likely to become diabetic. If you have difficulty falling asleep, that's even a little worse. And if you can't stay asleep, then that's the worst thing of all. So sleep can be a real problem, and if you are having trouble with sleep, there are a couple things I would recommend. One of those is go see a sleep specialist. He might have to test you in a lab overnight to see what's happening, but if you have certain problems that can be detected, then you may be able to be helped a lot and find that you can sleep much better. So that's one issue. The other is to be very regular in the hours in which you try to sleep, because sleep experts will tell you you will sleep better if you keep regular hours when you're trying to sleep. And so that's important. There are conditions for the best sleep. One of those is to avoid eating about 3 hours before you plan to go to bed, because if your stomach is full of food, you will not sleep very well. You will not be able to get down into those deep levels of sleep, which really help your body to restore itself. Because your brain is kept busy trying to deal with the food you ate, it just won't allow you to really get that rest that you need. Another thing is to avoid vigorous exercise near bedtime. Both eating and vigorous exercise tend to raise the body temperature, and your body needs to reduce its temperature when you're going to sleep. And so that's the reason for those. You probably heard that you should avoid electronic screens near bedtime, and the reason for that is the blue light tends to have a serious effect on the melatonin, and it stops the production of the melatonin, so you won't get tired as easy, and you won't be as ready to sleep. And then try to avoid emotionally charged issues near bedtime, of course, because that's not going to help you sleep. And then caffeine you shouldn't use in the evening. I don't recommend it any time, but you certainly don't want to use it in the evening. And my concern with caffeine is rather simple in a way, and that is that caffeine, of course, can keep you awake, but the other thing it does, it blocks the receptors in your body which detect that you are tired, and it makes you feel like you are not tired. And that can be a serious problem. Now, you probably know that people who can't feel pain have a serious problem. I mean, if you can't feel pain in your feet, what happens? You tend to injure them and damage them, and you get sores, and you get infections, and you have multiple problems from it. So your nerves that tell you to be careful with your feet and your tissues are very important. The same is true for any part of your body. It's just that the feet tend to get affected more often. So pain is very important. Well, I'll tell you, tiredness is also very important for a similar reason. If you don't know you're tired, then you don't change your behavior to get rest when you need it. Then you're trying to function when your body is tired, even though it can't tell you, and you won't perform as well. So that's the real reason caffeine is an issue any time of day. Though if you want to sleep, you know, of course, it's not something you want to be using in the evening. Now, the conditions for best sleep also, as I mentioned, include having a regular bedtime and follow it with rare exceptions. I mean, there will be exceptions. Every rule has its exceptions. But keeping the room dark is also very important. Even a little light will reduce the melatonin your body produces. Even a night light, if it's right there in your face when you're trying to sleep, will reduce the melatonin your body will produce. Another thing is to keep the room cool, about 65 degrees, because that helps your body be able to cool off. And you probably know by experience, if you're too warm, you won't sleep well. And I have discovered if I have an electric blanket on too warm, I might sleep, but I don't sleep well and I wake up feeling tired. So I will use my electric blanket just to get warm in the evening when I go to bed, but then turn it off before I go to sleep, because it doesn't work well for me when I'm trying to get a good night's rest. And then, of course, use a comfortable bed and pillow, because that's really crucial. Especially as you get old and have neck pain, you might need a couple of pillows just to adjust however you need to in order to be able to sleep. The book of Psalms in the Bible has interesting counsel in regard to sleep. In Psalm 127, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." So the real important thing here is to realize that God wants us to be at peace and to have good sleep. All right. Now let's talk a little about meal timing. Meal timing is something that you can change, and people do have meals whenever they choose. The healthiest thing is to have a meal at a regular time every day. And why is it important? Because your stomach has a circadian clock, and your intestines and your liver and your pancreas that make enzymes to digest your food have a circadian clock. And your body learns when you're going to have a meal. If you will give it a chance and give it a meal at a regular time, it will learn when it's coming and it will prepare. And animal experiments show how important that is. So one of the things that happens is that your stomach actually produces a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone that makes you hungry. And if you don't get enough sleep, your body actually makes more ghrelin, and you're hungrier, and that's why people have weight problems when they don't get good sleep at night. But the other thing that's been learned is they've actually studied humans to see what happens with the level of ghrelin even when they're not eating. So they take humans and starve them for several days. They have to agree, of course, to do this as an experiment. And they look at the ghrelin level, and they find that the ghrelin level goes up before the time when they would have eaten if they were going to eat, even though they're not going to eat. That ghrelin level goes up and makes them hungry. So if your body knows when the meal is likely to come, it actually produces ghrelin to go up, raise that level, and cause you to feel hungry because it knows food is coming and you should eat it then and not some other time. Now, why do I say you should eat it then and not some other time? because your liver and your pancreas and your intestines all have cells that make the enzymes to digest the food, and they all produce those enzymes ahead of time, so they're there waiting when the food shows up so the body can dump out the enzymes to digest the food. But it's a bit of work for the cells to make those enzymes, and they get them all prepared ahead of time and packaged ready to deliver. And if you don't eat, then they have to unpackage them and take them all apart until it's time for the next meal. And that's exactly what the body does. So if you eat at a time when the body's not expecting it, it doesn't have any enzymes ready, and then your brain has to get busy and try to help remedy that situation, and it takes more work from your brain to get the enzymes created at this odd time that it wasn't expecting them, and you actually are not going to digest your food as well because of all this extra work that's going on, and the body is not prepared for the meal. All right. So that's the advantage, that the body learns when the meal is going to come and it gets prepared ahead of time, so it's basically a reflex action of your body producing everything that's needed to deal with that meal, and your mind can be doing other tasks and not have to worry about actually, and it doesn't really worry about it, but it does have to do a lot of things subconsciously if you don't have everything ready. And a lot of thinking itself is subconscious. So I do believe that when the subconscious is deflected to have to deal with these other issues, then thinking itself doesn't go on the way it would. And you're not as capable of being creative and doing things and being what we call on the ball, so to speak. Now, there are very interesting experiments that have been done on mice and cancer, and of course scientists know how to give mice cancer, and it's all done in an experimental setting, and the mice are cared for in a way that they don't suffer as much as they would be if they had cancer in the wild, and they will be euthanized before the cancer develops to an extent to actually kill them. So it is not as cruel as it might sound, but it allows study of some very important things. So experimenters have taken mice and they have caused them to be chronically jet lagged, and the way you do that is that you have mice in their normal setting, and generally they will have a light on, and that's their nighttime when the light is on, and they're sleeping, and then when the light goes off they have darkness for 12 hours and they're up doing their business and eating and whatever, maybe running on an exercise wheel. Out in the wild they would be out hunting for food all night, but in the environment of the laboratory they don't have to hunt that hard for food. But you can chronically jet lag them, and the way you do that is you keep changing the time when the light is on. Every couple of days you change it by 8 hours. Well, they can never get used to a rhythm because there is no rhythm, so they're chronically jet lagged. Or you can cause a lesion in their suprachiasmatic nucleus, their master timekeeper. They have one just like humans do, and you can sever the nerves there so that the timekeeper can keep time, but the rest of the body doesn't get any signal, so that the mouse doesn't have any signal to keep time by, and it will be a confused situation. And even though you can do those things, you can then experiment by giving regularly timed meals, and mice are not used to regularly timed meals, but they do learn when they're coming, and it makes a difference for them. So let's look at the results of experiments where a scientist has actually done that. And here you have a graph showing the weight of tumors, and these mice were of two kinds. In the first panel there on the left you see the suprachiasmatic nucleus with a plus sign, means that's a normal mouse. his suprachiasmatic nucleus is normal. But the one on the right side there with the white bar, that nucleus was lesioned or ablated, so there was no function. And what you see is when that timekeeper is not working, the tumor grows much better. So the immune system of the mouse is not able to resist the growth of that tumor nearly as well because the timekeeping mechanism for that mouse is not functioning properly. And you see for these two different kinds of tumors, one an osteosarcoma, that's a bone tumor, the other a pancreatic adenocarcinoma, that's one that we know kills people a lot. Those two tumors, the results are pretty much the same. If that master time mechanism is not working, the tumor grows on the body much better. And that suggests something very important that may be true as well for humans, though we can't do that kind of experiment in a human. The second panel shows the light-dark cycle LD in a normal way. That's the dark black bar on the left side of that panel, panel B. And then right next to it, the same LD, but meal timing, MT, is there also. So the mouse has normal light-dark cycle to help him have a rhythm, but when you add the meal timing, he gets more rhythm and he is able to resist the growth of the tumor even more, and it's smaller. Now you might ask, why is that black bar higher there than in the left panel A? That is simply because that was over a longer time period. And then we see the same result for both kinds of tumors there. Then if we go to panel C, we see again the light-dark cycle, the normal cycle with a very dark bar. And that's how big the tumor grows. And then right next to it is the chronically jet-lagged mouse, and his tumor grows quite a bit larger because his timing is all confused. And then you actually see benefit even in the timing that was confused because the light-dark cycle is not really following a rhythm. If you give that mouse his meals on a regular 24-hour cycle, his digestive organs can latch onto that signal and actually have a 24-hour cycle even though the day-night cycle isn't normal. And he sees benefit, his tumor doesn't grow as large. So I find those very fascinating experiments, and they suggest that to be healthy, we really need to follow our rhythms and have our meals on a regular basis and our sleep on a regular basis. And when my wife Bonnie and I got married, I wanted to follow a regular rhythm. She was used to having a weekend when she could sleep in several hours, but we reached an agreement. If I would make breakfast every day, she would get up and have breakfast at the same time with me every day. And that worked for us. And she used to have migraine headaches every Monday because she was following a weird schedule on the weekends. And once she started following a regular schedule, a migraine headache on Monday went away. So, and actually if you talk to headache experts, they will tell you get regular sleep if you have trouble with headaches. And if you talk to a sleep expert, they will tell you get regular sleep if you want to get good sleep. Now, meal timing is important, not just that you have it on a regular basis, but that you allow enough hours between meals, because your stomach and your digestive system needs rest like everything else in this world that is alive needs rest. So if you allow about 5 hours between meals, your digestive system has time to digest your food and then get a couple of hours of rest before it's ready to take on another meal. And also, if you're going to have a third meal, which you don't have to do, but we mostly do that, if you do that, make that meal light. Don't eat a heavy meal near bedtime because you won't get good sleep. And illustrated here is the fact that when you're really getting deep sleep, your nerves are not really working much. They're just kind of gliding along in a rhythm, a very slow rhythm. When you're awake, your nerves are sending signals back rapidly, back and forth between each other, and the EEG is very low amplitude and shows a lot of motion, rapid signals. But when you're in deep sleep, most of your nerves are in a very slow rhythm. They're not really communicating with each other in a normal way for normal activity. They are simply resting. And that's really important. All right, so when to eat, but maybe what to eat when. Breakfast is a good meal to make a large meal because your digestive organs are ready and rested, assuming you didn't eat a heavy meal at night. Now, many people eat a heavy meal at night and they don't even feel hungry at breakfast time, and that's understandable. If you're going to eat a heavy meal at night, then you're not going to eat a heavy meal at breakfast. But I do believe the heavy meal at breakfast is the healthiest way to eat. And actually, studies of people who lose significant weight, if people have lost 25 pounds, they actually can enter themselves into a registry that's kept by people in the United States. And there are like 3,000 people in that registry who have entered information about themselves, and over 70% of them eat their large meal at breakfast time, have a good breakfast. And so include in that breakfast some fat, some protein especially. It has been studied and people actually feel better and fuller all day if they have protein at breakfast time. And nuts is a really good source of protein. So, but you also need carbs because they give you energy. And so what I find is a really good breakfast is a whole grain cooked cereal with some fruit on top and some nuts sprinkled on top as well. And if I get a breakfast like that, I really feel good. So I recommend it. And you can do all of that and follow that rule about not having too many calories per gram of food. Now, supper time, as I said, really ought to be a light meal. And in saying that, I'm going to also mention something else, and that is something called the 10-gram rule. This is a well-known rule. 10 grams of fat, which is in solid food, not liquid, you're not drinking oil, but 10 grams of fat cooked into your food takes another hour to digest every time you add another 10 grams of fat in your food. So if you eat a meal with a lot of fat in the evening, you're going to have that food with you for hours. And so you better be prepared to spend some time doing something and giving all of that time to digest a bit before you try to sleep, because you won't sleep very well if you don't. So that's just a rule. It's not something that you have to spend a lot of time thinking about, but if you're thinking about an evening meal, it's worth thinking about how much fat is in the meal. Now, we've talked about reading labels, and I want to spend a little time with you again on reading labels, because reading labels in the grocery store is where good health begins. And we've talked about some rules and calories per gram of food, and you can just look at how many calories and how many grams are in a serving and divide the calories by the grams to get the ratio. If that's less than 1, you know you have really healthy food in that regard. And even if that ratio is up to about 1.5, you're still doing extremely well. And then the second rule was grams of fiber per serving divided by total carbs, or pardon me, grams of fiber per serving compared with total carbs per serving divided by 10. And if the fiber is greater than the carbs when you divide by 10, then you know that's healthy in regard to fiber and a good product. And then sodium per serving, not more than 140 milligrams ideally. You can't always be ideal, but that's the goal. And if you do that, you will limit your sodium, and it'll be what's called low sodium. It may not be the lowest possible, but it is low sodium and enough to have effect on your blood pressure, in fact. So it's worth thinking about. And so now we're going to look at some different food products that you might encounter in the grocery store. And the first one I'm showing here on the screen is a can of black beans. And so the first question you would ask is the ratio of calories to grams good? And if you look at the top part of that picture, you actually see that the ratio is indeed very good. It's less than 1. 120 divided by 130, that's going to be less than 1, right? And the second thing you want to look at is the sodium. And about halfway down, you see the sodium, 350 milligrams. That's a little higher than you would like. In fact, that's about 3 times as much as you would like. But if you look at the very bottom of the picture there, you see that there is quite a bit of potassium. That helps to counteract some of that sodium, so it's not quite as bad as it looks. What about fiber? Well, about just a little below the sodium there, you see the total carbohydrates, 21 grams, divide by 10, 2.1, and the fiber is right below that, 6 grams, and 6 grams is definitely larger than 2.1, in fact quite a bit larger, and so it's very healthy in regard to fiber. Beans are really great in terms of fiber and in terms of calories. You can't do better. And in regard to potassium, even though this particular can doesn't look quite as good as we would like, if you look around on the store shelves, you will find much better choices. And here's a can with a better choice. And if you look at this, you'll see that the calories issue is the same. The fiber issue is the same. But look, there's only 5 milligrams of sodium in this can per serving. So it's really good on the sodium. It doesn't tell you about potassium, but that's not important when you only have 5 milligrams of sodium in there per serving. So that's a healthy product, and you can find that if you look in most grocery stores. On the other hand, if you can't find it, you can always wash the beans before you use them. You just rinse them with water, and then you can use them, and you will not have that sodium level to deal with. Here is a product. It's an imitation meat product, Morningstar Veggie Dogs. And you would think that if it's a substitute for meat, it ought to really be healthy. Well, you have to look at that. And the calories per gram, you see 50 calories and 40 grams. So that's a ratio about 1.25. That's really not bad. So it's pretty healthy in that regard. But then you look at the sodium, whoa, 430 milligrams of sodium, and right below it is potassium, and you're not getting any help on the potassium. There's only 15 milligrams of potassium. So that's not good. If you've got blood pressure issues, you don't want to eat that product. And then what about fiber? Well, you see there's 4 grams of carbohydrates, so you divide by 10, you have 0.4 grams. But the dietary fiber is so low, they don't even tell you how much there is. You can't even decide based on that whether it's a good product, and you'd have to say probably not. And if you're worried about the sodium, you don't want it anyway. But here's something called the Boca Burger Original, and lo and behold, it's good. it has 70 calories for 71 grams. That's a good ratio of just less than 1. It has sodium of 280 milligrams, but it has potassium of 370 milligrams, so that's actually not bad. And sodium is high, but the potassium is high enough to make up for it. What about the fiber? Well, lo and behold, it has 6 grams of carbs, so that's 0.6 when you divide by 10 to compare with 4 grams of fiber. And the 4 grams of fiber is much better than the 0.6 grams from the carbs. And so it's a healthy product all the way around. And I would recommend it if you're looking for something to try out. And if you never tried it before, you might find it to be something you would like. Now here's tofu. And tofu is usually a very healthy product. And here we have, on the left side of the picture, you see 80 calories for 85 grams. So that's very good. And then up on the right corner, you see sodium of only 10 milligrams. So that per serving is really good. And then if you're worried about fiber, look right below it, and you see there's total carbs of 2 grams divided by 10 is 0.2 and 2 grams of fiber, so it's good in regard to fiber. So it's all around a good product. Now, tofu doesn't have any flavor, so you have to put it in food that you add flavor to, like the curry that Bonnie just demonstrated, which I find very tasty. And this is a great product to put in to a dish like that. Finally, soy milk. And soy milk, as you see here, has 100 calories, and if you can see it at the top of your screen, there's 240 mLs per serving and 100 calories, and 240 mLs is 240 grams essentially, because it's about the same as water, and that would be 240 grams. So it's very good in regard to calories. And look at the sodium, 85 milligrams of sodium, that's good. And look at the fiber. Lo and behold, total carbs divided by 10 is 0.9 compared with 2 grams of fiber, so it's healthy in regard to fiber. Never think of soy milk as healthy in regard to fiber, but it is. So that's just a few examples of things that you can look at in the grocery store and decide, is this a healthy thing that I want to eat or not? All right, and then as we talked about before, if you're making changes and you're on medication or doctor is treating you, whatever, work with your doctor to make changes and discuss with your doctor. But of course, doing these healthy things that we have talked about, like eating at a regular time, eating at a good time of day, getting regular sleep, getting enough sleep but not too much sleep, those are all healthy things that your doctor, I'm very positive, will simply say, keep up the good work, and we don't need to change anything. But they will reduce your risk of disease, and they will also give you more energy, I guarantee that. And if it doesn't give you more energy, this is a money-back guarantee. Of course, I'm a little bit joking there because you didn't have to pay anything for this. And I'm very pleased that you're able to come, and I hope that what we've talked about, that you have found to be useful.